Let me share my slides. Okay. Sorry, my cat just jumped up on my lap. So I'm really happy to be here with you to be talking about WELL and GRESB and how they can work together. First, I want to give some context and background on the GRESB assessments in case not everyone is familiar. It does then help better understand what the WELL alignment actually means. So GRESB is a benchmark for real asset portfolios. They have both a real estate assessment and an infrastructure assessment. Today, we're going to focus just on the real estate assessment. But GRESB assesses and benchmarks ESG performance of real assets, providing standardized and validated data to capital markets. GRESB has a number of investor members, and actually the GRESB origin story, it was created in 2009. A couple of institutional investors in Europe came together and funded the creation of GRESB because these investors wanted to understand more about the ESG performance of their real estate investments. So from the start, GRESB has been very investor driven. So the way that GRESB works is that it basically serves this middleman role in between the company's funds and assets and the investors themselves. So GRESB is a benchmark, which is really very interesting from a research and market transformation perspective, because it basically allows the market to drive itself forward. And GRESB plays the role of, providing material ESG performance data to investors. And many investors utilize GRESB to guide their investment decisions. There are instances where an investor might use a GRESB score to make a decision on whether or not to invest in a certain fund. It's also become very embedded in the real estate industry to the extent that there are executives that have bonuses, and sort of their pay structure is driven by their GRESB performance. So it's become quite an influential benchmark. GRESB runs on an annual cycle. So every April 1st, the GRESB portal opens up for companies and funds to start submitting their data. The portal closes on July 1st, and then the fall of every year is when GRESB releases their results. And this year, here's some snapshots of the results this year. Within the real estate assessment, over 1,800 funds participated in the GRESB real estate assessment this year, which represents over $7 trillion in gross asset value, spanning across a number of countries, as you can see here. And those funds that participated in the real estate assessment collectively hold 150,000 individual real assets. So this group is likely very familiar with ESG, but I thought this was a nice slide, just kind of providing a snapshot of the various topics covered by the GRESB benchmark. Since it is an annual cycle, they do make updates to the assessment on an annual basis. However, the assessment itself doesn't change too much on a year-to-year basis. And so this approach and the investor orientation of GRESB really is a top-down type of engagement strategy. So the investors are asking the companies and funds that they invest in to provide information to GRESB. And this leads to companies typically listen to their investors. So it leads to a high level of engagement amongst the companies and funds that participate. And as I said, lots of pressure on what their GRESB performance looks like, because the investor cares. And so here's an image showing the GRESB model and how it works as a benchmark. Companies are scored along two dimensions. You'll see on the y-axis here, management and policy, and on the x-axis, implementation and measurement. over time, GRESB is moving more towards asset level reporting of performance. And so the performance portion of the assessment is more heavily weighted than the management and policy portion of the assessment. And companies will be kind of, ranked on their performance in both of those categories and then plotted along this chart. And GRESB has a star ranking system from 1 star up until 5 stars. So the companies that are the best are the ones that'll be at the top right corner of this graph that are doing a good job managing themselves and are actually performing at a high level from an ESG perspective as well. And this is an interesting kind of look at historically. So the GRESB 2015 results, companies were pretty spread out. There's lots of different, lots of range in how companies performed in GRESB in 2015. Regionally, Australia and the APAC region have been pretty strong in GRESB. North America was slower to catch on. But if you fast forward to GRESB 2021, there's a kind of a condensation of companies really happening up at the upper right. So the annual nature of GRESB really demonstrates that companies can make pretty significant improvements on a year-to-year basis. And this is another look at the same concept, basically looking at first-year participants. So the first year that a company participates in GRESB, there's a grace period, and it provides companies with an opportunity to develop a baseline without risking the reputation that they have with their investors. Then after that grace period, they are scored on an annual basis, and pretty typically, companies don't do very well their first time, the first year that they participate, but then they do kind of continue to improve on a year-to-year basis, as you can see here, which is showing companies that started in 2011 are now at the top, have consistently been, at the top of the pack compared to those companies that started later. So in my former role, I recently joined the International Well Building Institute earlier this year. And previously, I was at the U.S. Green Building Council, and we had some grant funding from a public health foundation here in the U.S. that allowed us to partner with GRESB in 2015 to basically ask the question, how do these companies and funds promote health and well-being? Being an ESG benchmark, GRESB has always had some level of social indicators and some of the indicators that were related to health, but we were able to come together to actually look at this question more specifically. So here we are with the GRESB team, that's me at the end, back in December 2015, starting to work on the GRESB Health and Wellbeing module. And so we created this standalone module that was totally voluntary. It first released in 2016. It ran from 2016 until 2018, at which point the indicators from the module were incorporated into the GRESB real estate assessment. So now the assessment that is running on an annual basis has this content that we developed that's specifically focused on health and well-being, which really contributes to the high level of alignment that WELL has with GRESB. We were able, for those interested, to create a report back in 2019 that communicates all of the data and findings from this 3-year of the module. So happy to provide that link if it's of interest. But the GRESB Health and Wellbeing module, which again is now part of the GRESB real estate assessment, it had a structure of analyzing health and wellbeing processes for real estate portfolios, both from an internal perspective, meaning how is a real estate company promoting the health of its own employees, and then also from an external perspective, meaning how is a real estate company managing its business and its services in a way that has impact on tenant and community health and well-being. Across both of those spectrums, both internally and externally, the actual health process stays the same, which was very informed by a public health framework called Health Impact Assessment. So within both sides, it's looking to see what the company's policy is for health, whether that be employee health or tenant health. Does the company have a mechanism of understanding population needs, setting actual goals, and then taking specific action to address those needs? And then also, are they monitoring outcomes in a way that can lead to a continuously improving system? So the way that companies were scored within the health and well-being module was looking at how they were doing both internally and externally. So the companies that are up at the upper right-hand corner are going to be doing really well in terms of how they promote the health of their own employees, and then also how they're promoting the health of their tenants and the communities in which they operate through their products and services. It was really amazing. I mean, this sort of demonstrates how long health has been a trend within the real estate industry. So in 2016, the first year of the health and well-being module, which was totally voluntary and actually different from the GRESB assessment, which was investor driven. Investors were not asking about health in 2015, 2016. This was more of a bottom up trend because companies were starting to compete with each other on health and well-being. And so the first year of the module, 174 real estate funds participated, and that number increased over time until the final year in 2018, when almost 300 funds participated, which represented a third of all GRESB participants that year. There was a decent amount of spread across different regions as well. And this is a graph just showing the annual GRESB participation up until 2021. And again, those health and well-being indicators were woven into the assessment in 2019, which meant that at that point, over 1,000 real estate companies and funds are having to respond to those health indicators, and it's having impact on their actual GRESB score, which is the thing that investors care most about. So the way that the module was structured, and this is also how the health indicators in the GRESB assessment are structured, is that they're asking about specific strategies to promote health and well-being. And the questions are very similar for both that internal perspective in terms of a company's employees, and then also the external perspective in terms of their tenants. And so within the strategies question, it's asking about specific actions that companies are taking through design and operations, through access and opportunity, through programmatic approaches. So maybe doing some sort of health program that wouldn't have necessarily real estate implications. And then also how they're interacting with the community surrounding the assets that they operate. Here's an example. I just pulled this to show the different answer options that real estate companies have when they're answering questions around strategies that they take to promote tenant and customer health and well-being. So a lot of these are going to be very much supported by the WELL. All of these are very much supported by the WELL standard. So a company that was utilizing WELL would be able to answer very positively to these GRESB indicators. And here are some examples of the access and opportunity strategies. Those are things around, providing access to healthcare, and then, actions in surrounding community. A lot of those things there, like providing local jobs, engaging in community revitalization efforts, things like that. And then here's an example of the measurement question. So asking companies how they're measuring their health and well-being performance. And this again would be very aligned with the WELL standard in terms of measurements regarding indoor environmental quality, experience and opinions through surveys, and health and well-being outcomes, and then behavior as well. And so similarly to what I showed on those earlier graphs around the GRESB model, when looking just at the health and well-being module, companies improved pretty consistently over time as they participated. What we found really interesting, and this also has implications for the WELL alignment, is if you look at this scatter plot, you'll see there's not that many companies in that lower right-hand corner And what's along the x-axis here is the external approach, so how a company is promoting health through its products and services, and the y-axis is the internal approach to employee health. And so what we found is that companies were very rarely doing well externally, unless they were also first doing well internally. And that makes sense in many ways. A company needs to establish its own internal culture and really value the health of its own people, its own employees, and then can kind of take that external approach to how they manage their products and services. So this actually supports, the utilization of WELL for a real estate company's own employees as well, has impact on how those employees are going to be able to perform and how a company is going to be able to structure its external operations focused on tenant and community health. And then just showing as an example of what GRESB indicators, how they're actually structured, because this will make it easier to understand the WELL alignment and how we've structured that. So here's an example of the employee health and well-being indicator from this year's GRESB assessment. And so the indicators will have that top line question that's a yes, no, typically. And then within the yes section, there's other sub-indicators that a company could select in terms of indicating which aspects of a health and well-being process they have in place in this case. And then here's the example of just it's the same for the tenant for the external question. So the same kinds of answer options. This one's just focused on tenant health, whereas the one previously was focused on employee health. So earlier this summer, we were able to update the mapping between WELL v2 and the 2022 GRESB Real Estate Assessment. So I'll get into that now. And so for this year of reporting, WELL v2 aligned with almost 40% of the GRESB Real Estate Assessment, which is quite high. The GRESB Real Estate Assessment is now structured into 3 different components. And within the management component, WELL is aligned with 23 indicators. In the performance component, WELL is aligned with 12 indicators. And within the development component, WELL is also aligned with 12 indicators. So this means that participating in WELL can help companies answer positively to almost 40% of the indicators within the GRESB Real Estate Assessment. And that's really going to be helping a company improve their GRESB score. In addition to that, WELL itself is recognized within the indicator, the GRESB indicator focused on building certification. So WELL certification is worth a full GRESB point, and the health safety rating is worth a partial 0.6 points. So that also can help companies improve their GRESB scores. Oh, sorry, this is fuzzy, but this is a screenshot of how the mapping is structured, and we can send out the link. So the mapping this year was structured with starting from the GRESB perspective. We released this mapping right before the GRESB portal was going to close, and so we wanted to make sure that companies could find it really easy to identify GRESB indicators that they might not have been able to answer, and then map that to their WELL performance. So it's organized by the different GRESB categories. It'll have the GRESB indicator code and also the indicator title. And then there's the level of alignment, which is from slight to partial to full. Full alignment means that the WELL feature indicated in that next column can help a company fully achieve that GRESB indicator. Partial means that WELL feature would maybe help a company select 1 or 2 of the GRESB sub-indicators. And then slight alignment means that the WELL feature and the GRESB indicator are really intending to achieve and sort of address different things. However, they are somewhat aligned in the approach. And so it's worth a company looking into their actual approach to how they use the WELL feature and if it would help them respond positively to that GRESB indicator. And then the final column is pulling out those sub-indicators, so those GRESB sub-indicators, and making it really easy for a company when they're doing their GRESB submission to be able to say, based off of my utilization of these WELL features, I can answer positively to these GRESB indicators, and then I can select those sub-indicators in the part of the GRESB indicator that's asking for greater detail. This is an SDG impact report, so this is not related to GRESB. However, it's an existing tool that's offered to WELL at Scale clients to help them translate their WELL performance into SDG language related to the UN SDGs. And we're creating a similar tool based on the GRESB alignment. So basically, WELL at Scale clients will be able to really easily translate their WELL performance into spitting out specific GRESB indicators and sub-indicators that they're able to respond positively to. So it's a very cool Excel document that basically automatically imports a company's WELL performance and calculates that alignment in other frameworks, in this case SDGs, but we are working on the GRESB. The GRESB tool should be ready, will definitely be ready by next reporting season. And here is a really interesting analysis our colleague did looking at the GRESB sector leaders and the percentage of which use WELL. So in Asia, 45% of the GRESB sector leaders utilize WELL compared to 10% of non-sector leaders. In Oceania, 80% of sector leaders use WELL. So this is really demonstrating that the leaders within the GRESB assessment are also, leading within health and well-being and using WELL. And we're going to be this is based off of last year's GRESB results. We'll be updating it now that GRESB has released this year's results. So it'll be interesting to see how those numbers have shifted. And just an example of a specific company who has been using WELL to help improve their GRESB performance. Neo Properties, they achieved the health safety rating in January 2021, and then they upgraded to WELL Portfolio, which is now WELL at Scale. They report to GRESB in both the standing investments and the development benchmark. And they've been able to successfully utilize WELL to improve their GRESB performance, and also kind of use that alignment to also guide the specific WELL features that they're selecting as well. So that's the other use for this alignment document, is that companies that are using both, if they're really trying to target improved GRESB performance, it'll be very easy to highlight which WELL features are going to help you drive that improved GRESB performance. And so companies can prioritize their feature selection in that way. And just a forward-looking take, and actually we're quite excited. IWBI is in the midst of formalizing. So we're going to be working kind of more closely with GRESB moving forward as a premier partner of GRESB. But GRESB did a stakeholder survey earlier this year or last year that they've published on their website, basically asking what is not being sufficiently covered by the GRESB assessment. And so in the social issues category, I found it incredibly interesting and exciting for our work that if within tenant health and well-being, actually 30% of investors feel like tenant health and well-being is not sufficiently addressed within the GRESB assessment. So that's really exciting. I mean, that means that means investors are going to be asking more specific questions of the funds they invest in around health, which is really going to drive increased performance. And then looking at the governance one, diversity, equity, and inclusion really rose to the top here. And GRESB has it's included diversity, equity, and inclusion in a few of the indicators for next year's assessment in response to this survey. And that is all I have. Here's a nice ending quote from Andrew Cole when he was at Lend-Lease, just talking about utilizing social impact and human health to really drive their fund strategy and the way that they approach strategy at a high corporate level. So I hope that was informative. Happy to answer any questions and provide any follow-up links as well.